Welcome to this Arnold Culliford tutorial on mosaic knitting. This video is part of our Confident Knitting series, 12 patterns to teach you 12 new techniques from the world's best knitting designers. Today's tutorial will show you how to work mosaic stitch patterns, such as those used in Marceline Smith's beautiful terrain mitts that are found in Confident Knitting. Mosaic knitting is a bit of an illusion magic trick within the knitting world, because the stitch patterns that you knit look like they're stranded colour work, but in actual fact these are created entirely with one colour at a time. So you're going to work with one colour, knitting stitches or purling stitches, but you're going to slip some stitches. And you'll always do that for a pair of rows, and on a pair of rows you're going to slip the same stitches each time, so those are very intuitive to knit. Then on a future row, the stitches that will slipped will be worked and the stitches that will worked will be slipped, and that means that over time you end up with the same number of stitches in each of the columns. You don't end up with a kind of scrunched up fabric where stitches have been slipped in some places and overall and not in others. So there are 3 sections to this video tutorial and you'll need them all for the terrain mitts. I'm going to show you how to work the stitch pattern in the round, which is how it's worked at the beginning of the mitt. I'm then going to show you how to work mosaic knitting when you're working backwards and forwards. It's very similar, but there are a couple of small differences. And then I'm also going to show you how to carry your yarns at the end of the round, and this is a trick that's helpful for any kind of strike work where you're going to carry yarns up the inside, because you don't need to break off your yarns at any point in this pattern. You can just keep them all running up the edges. We have chapters in our video tutorials, so if you hover over the timeline at the bottom of this screen or tap on it, you can see the sections of the video marked and you can jump straight to the part that you need. This is my first round working with the dark brown coloured yarn, and the pattern for this round is going to be slip to, knit to, and I'm going to work all the way around in that pattern. So the first job is to slip the first 2 stitches, and you don't have to slip them separately. You can put your right needle into both of the stitches at the same time. You're slipping them purlwise all the time, so they're just moving from one side to the other without twisting. And while you slip them, the yarn is at the back of the work, which is the wrong side. So you're always going to be keeping the yarn at the wrong side of the work when you're slipping your stitches. I'm now ready to knit the next 2 stitches. And having worked that first one, I'm just going to check the tension, because as in stranded colour work, you've got a float running at the back of the work, and you want that float to just be sitting nicely there and not so tight that it's scrunching up these 2 stitches, and not so loose that you've got big gappy runs of yarn at the back there. So knit 2, check the float's okay. We're now going to slip the next 2 stitches, and again we're going to slip them both together and then knit the next 2. And I always, just as I go, keep an eye on how the stitches are lying on the needles, making sure the floats are nice and even. Now this is, as I was saying, this is the same as for stranded colour work, but because you're only working with one yarn each time, it's easier to just keep an eye on what's going on because you're juggling fewer things. I'm now going to show you how to work back and forth in a mosaic knitting pattern. I'm still on circular needles because I'm just doing back and forth as I would for the thumb opening. But don't be put off by that, it's exactly the same as if you were doing a stitch pattern flat. So my right side rows are going to be worked in exactly the same way as they were when I was working in the round. So here I'm going to be knitting the first 2 stitches just as normal. And now I'm going to be slipping the next 2 stitches. The yarn's held on the wrong side of the work, which is at the back because I'm on a knit row. So 2 stitches slipped, and then I'm knitting. making sure that the tension isn't too tight across the back of the slip stitches. And I'm going to carry on in that way all the way around. I've now come to the end of my first right side row, and I'm just going to turn round now and work the wrong side row. Okay, my white yarn's still attached to the beginning of the row back here, and that's fine. Now, on the wrong side row, you're going to be slipping purlwise with the yarn at the front this time. So it sounds different, but it's actually the same, because that just keeps the yarn on the wrong side of the work. And then instead of knitting, we're going to be purling. This particular mosaic knitting pattern is based on stocking stitch, so we're going to be purling on wrong side rows, but you can also work mosaic stitch patterns in garter stitch where you'd be knitting on the wrong side row. But the same principle stands, that when you slip your stitches, your yarn's going to always be held at the wrong side of the work. So the first two are slipped, and then we're going to purl the next two. And now we're going to slip the next two and purl, making sure that that float is nice, snug, and not too loose but not too tight either. It's a bit of a Goldilocks thing, I guess, getting it just right. And that's all there is to it on the wrong side rows. So alternate between slipping and purling. So the last thing to show you here is going to be how to manage the fact that you've got all three of your yarns attached to the work at the same time. So I've just finished a round where I've been working with the dark brown yarn, and I'm now going to be working with the white yarn. So all I'm going to do is to hold the dark brown and the pale grey, those are the old yarns, or the old yarn and the yarn I'm not using, and I'm going to hold them over the new yarn, which is the white yarn, and then I'm going to pick up the white yarn and work with it. So you hold the old over the new, or the old and the one you're not using over the new. I'll show you that again at the end of this round when I'm starting work with the grey. So I've reached the end of the round with my white yarn, so that's now my old yarn, and I'm ready to start a new round with the grey yarn. So the grey yarn now is going to be my new yarn, and all I do before I start work with the grey is I take the old yarn, the white, and the yarn I'm not using, that's the dark brown, and I'm going to hold them over the grey. And you only need to do this when you change colour. So if you're just continuing to use the same colour, then you can just leave the yarns alone at the start of the round. But if you're changing colour, hold the old over the new. There we go, we carry on like that. And that just catches in the yarns at the start of the round here, because if you don't do that, you're going to get these long vertical floats, and they can make it really hard to keep that tension neat at the start of the round. And so we want to have a tidy start of the round, so we just catch them in when we change colour. I do hope you found that video tutorial on mosaic knitting helpful. These were the Terrain Mitts by Marceline Smith, and you can find the pattern in our book Confident Knitting. We're able to keep our video tutorials free from adverts thanks to our amazing customers who make purchases from our online shop. You can find the shop up top here, where you can buy a copy of Confident Knitting. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel at the bottom right, and then you'll be sure to know when we release our next video tutorial. Thanks ever so much for watching. Bye bye.